Today, we're looking at Diamine Gray. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Diamine Gray is a gray ink, which is sometimes when you look at grays, they're not, and this one is. Now, to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a cross Bailey with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately dunk it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is a light gray line across the bottom that's staying in place. A nice light even gray all the way up. And only at the top does the gray all collect together and start to become much darker, but still not a black. So this is not a diluted black ink. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. That line across the bottom is much darker and much more present, showing that this ink should have some resistance to being washed off the page easily. The gray that moves up is still very uniform, and the gray across the top is still dark and beautiful the way it is. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard is it going to be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, with the exception of the small h, it seems to handle it quite well. While it does have some feathering and it does have some spread that occurs, you can mostly read it. But looking at how that second small h blurs out, I might avoid this in a note-taking situation. Which gets reinforced when we look at what happens with water. A little bit. We see with water a lot of that dark spot of the gray that was underneath it lifts up off the page. It does leave a lot of the gray behind. It is definitely not all coming off the paper. Pen flesh does everything that water does, but just a little bit more. If you look right across the top of it, you see a little bit more of that ink is coming off. Now, this might be one of those inks that takes a little bit of a soaking to get it out of your pen. Hopefully pen flesh is all it's going to take, but there looks like there's some stuff really resisting it there. Not normal for Diamine inks to be this difficult to move. Bleach obliterates it, and if you had to use bleach, that 1/3 bleach solution should quickly go in, quickly come out, and then start getting flushed out of that pen. Now, for the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine Gray has a viscosity of 1.44, making it a very wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper in my writing samples. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine Gray has an average dry time of 19 seconds, making it normal. The higher side of normal, but still normal. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 offers no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Little lighter tone with the extra fine with no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer some really nice shading throughout the writing, where it's a much lighter gray and a much darker gray, all in the same word, like in quick, like in the, like in lazy. 14 seconds to dry. The medium, the same tone of gray. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, and yes, nice shading all over this writing, just like we got with the extra fine. Quick shows a lot of shades of gray. The shows lots of shades of gray. Over shows lots of shades of gray. 18 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby shows us plenty of color variation within the writing samples, and we did get plenty. And the smear test says you could likely recover it, and I'm going to believe that. Tomoe River. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, although it is a very dark gray here. It comes nowhere near looking black. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade on this paper, 21 seconds to dry. The medium, the same tone as the extra fine, no feather, spread. It does give some haloing, which is very nice. No sheen and no shade, 26 seconds to dry. Now the extra fine and the medium scrubby show us no color variation, and we didn't get any color variation. And the smear test says you likely couldn't recover what you wrote if you smeared it. So, Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, no spread. It does have haloing. Nice haloing in the 1.1. No sheen, no shade, dark, nowhere near black, definitely still gray. Extra fine is a lighter tone. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, and lots of really nice shading throughout the writing. I like that this gray stays gray. It only took 16 seconds to dry. The medium is a darker tone as its majority, but sometimes it gets much lighter, like in the extra fine. The medium had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, lots of beautiful shading through this writing. Quick really shows it off. Dark on the left, lighter in the middle, darker on the right. The starts dark, gets really dark, gets lighter on the E. Over starts really light and works its way darker all the way across. Nice. 19 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation. The smear test says you could likely recover it if you did smear it. So sometimes, especially with gray inks, you do have other colors that make it. Now the chromatography showed this is truly a gray. We had no bleeding, no ghosting on the yellow Rhodia. We didn't expect that. What does it do with the tone for having a yellow background? Well, absolutely nothing. This is a saturated color because the background color changing doesn't change the tones that we're getting. The 1.1 still has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine, noticeably lighter tone with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, lots of beautiful shading throughout. Sometimes we lose the shading with the yellow paper. We didn't lose the shading here. 16 seconds to dry. The medium, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, lots of beautiful shading throughout all of the writing, just like we got with the white paper. 19 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine and the medium show us plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation. The smear test says you could likely recover it, and I'm gonna believe it. So white lines. White lines has been sort of hit or miss. We have spots of bleed. I'm ignoring the scrubby. I have spots of bleed through. I don't know that it renders the back of the page unusable. We have no ghosting. The 1.1, very dark tone. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine. Darker than we've normally gotten with the extra fine. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade here. 5 seconds to dry. Now I think we lose the shading because this is not actually a white paper. It's a gray paper that has white lines on it, which makes the lines really disappear when you're working with it. It's very nice to work with for that reason. I just wish it was more fountain pen friendly. A noticeably darker tone with the medium. Still gray though. Doesn't come towards being black. It doesn't look like a washed out black as a gray, if that makes any sense. The medium had no feather, spread. It does offer little moments of haloing, like on the B in brown, on the N in brown, on the E in the. No sheen, no shading. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both showed us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation. And the smear test says you could likely recover it, and, that's usually pretty accurate. So this P. Berger paper, it's a French rule paper. This is really a student grade of paper. It's very thin. Plenty of bleed through. It did not touch the page underneath. With that amount of bleed through, you couldn't use the back. I don't think. Maybe you could. I couldn't. But we don't have show through. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It only took 4 seconds to dry. It is a lighter tone than we got with the 1.1. But when we go to the medium, we get the same tone we got with the 1.1. It gets a little bit darker than we had with the extra fine. The medium had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. It took 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both the extra fine and the medium, well, the extra fine shows a little bit of color variation. Very little, looking far left to far right. We don't get that in the writing sample. The medium shows no color variation. We didn't get it here. And the smear test, you could likely recover it if you did smear it. And that's all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine Gray, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Elixir's Midnight Marine because it is a nice blue, and the gray will complement it, that it draws attention to what you've written with the blue. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Diamine Gray? I think it's one of the nicer gray inks that I've looked at. It stays gray. It doesn't become black. It also has some very nice shading. So this is a very interesting gray ink because so many of them look like they're just diluted blacks. And this one is definitely a gray, which is a real step up in my book. Thanks for watching.